Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Parthaya Pradibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatvamanusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Namostu te Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Pullaravinda Yatapatra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharataila Purna Prajvalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetraikapanaye Jnanamudraya Krishnaya Gitamrita Duhe Namaha Sarvopanishado Gavo Dogda Gopalanandanaha Partho Vatsya Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gitamritam Mahata Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsa Chanuramadhanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I apologize for the technical difficulties we were having for the first few minutes. I hope we're back on track now. And it seems that we are. So we are in chapter 13, and we covered the first 4 verses last time. And now we're going to resume from verse 5. We just need a little review to catch up from where we left off, which was Krishna conveying the main theme of this chapter, the oneness of the individual soul with the Supreme Soul. In other words, the oneness of the Jivatma with the Paramatma. And Lord Krishna also began teaching Arjuna to differentiate all that can be seen and experienced in this universe. Differentiate that from the seer, the experiencer. Because that is the key to realizing that oneness. Now, we identify so much with all the things we perceive and see and hear and smell. All of our sense information, we identify with that. But he's going to take in this chapter, he's going to take our awareness inwards and tell us and guide us, of course, guide Arjuna and indirectly us, to that seer, knower, experiencer. This is the whole purpose of life, spiritual goal. So, in the language of the Bhagavad Gita, differentiating the seer from the seen, the experiencer from the experienced, or from the knower from that which is known, that process is called kshetrajna vibhagaha, which is not surprisingly the title of this chapter. And it is also more commonly known as Atma Anatma Viveka. It simply means differentiating between what is real and what is not real. What is inert, what is conscious, what is real and what is unreal, what is permanent and what is not. So through this process that Krishna is going to guide us through, we gradually come to grasp the difference between those two. The manifest inert world, in other words, this world that we can see, is actually inert according to Vedanta, according to Amma's teachings as well, same thing. The difference between that and the unmanifest consciousness, that enlivens this whole world, this whole universe. If there's life anywhere else, it's still enlivened by that singular consciousness, the Paramatma. So it's kind of crazy because we typically identify with this body. But he's telling us that the only thing that gives life to that is the only thing that's true. Everything else is inert. And so because of our confusion, we wrongly consider that the inert body, physical body, is conscious because the consciousness seems to have its home here inside this body. And we also consider the eternal consciousness, the consciousness which is supposed to be eternal. We think that it's limited to a body, and we think that it has a coming and a going in the form of birth and death. So when Amma says, I am the you, and you are the me in me, she's referring to the knower, the experiencer, the pure consciousness. There's no other way she can be that me in me. But our problem is that we haven't yet understood what that means. Maybe Amma means, from the day you were born, I was sitting right next to you in a subtle form, as a subtle being, and I was always with you. Or if she says, all your thoughts flow through me, we may think that, maybe she has a connection with not just me, but all these beings, and she can hear all of our thoughts. These are all dualistic notions and all wrong, basically. We haven't understood the meaning of these teachings, and that's why we're going to really need this process of separating the two. Because at present, right now, our individuality, our concept of what we call the Jivatma, the individual soul, is a complete mishmash and hodgepodge of the inert and the sentient, the Anatma and the Atma, the Kshetra and the Kshetrajna. So the differentiation that needs to take place is definitely not an external one. It's an purely internal. We need to ascertain the essence of our being. And that never changes. Unlike everything else, we typically consider to be me. My personality, where I was born, my gender, and my race, everything. Whether I'm smart or not so smart, or big, short, whatever. All these things have nothing to do with the reality that Krsna wants to reveal to us right here. They're all changing and therefore not the real me. And until we can perceive that essence that never changes, we will remain confused, at least to some degree. Because Amma says I'm infinite, but I don't feel that. I feel like I'm limited. I'm supposed to be ever free, but I definitely feel like a slave to my mind. I'm supposed to be pure bliss, but I suffer every day. So we won't experience the nature of the Paramatma, which is our birthright, until we complete this process of differentiating the inert from the conscious principle. So to help us recognize this, Krsna is going to guide us through a process whereby we remove all of those attributes we think are me. And then we take all those attributes, wrongly attributed qualities, and we give those to the inert world. We say, nope, that's not me. That thinking, okay, I was born. No, the body was born. The body is inert. That's not me. We say, this body was born, but it's not me. And then I have brown hair. No, I don't have brown hair. The body has brown hair. This is the house where I live. This is a house. There's a body that spends time in that house. It's not me, right? So the body is anatma, is impermanent, unreal, from the absolute state, from the absolute level. So thoughts of birth and death belong to the world. We can call it the anatma bucket, the inert world bucket. Not that we don't try to put that birth and death concept in the atma bucket. We don't try to put it in our definition of ourself. So virtually everything that we can think of goes in the inert world, anatma, kshetra bucket. Our likes and dislikes, those belong to the world in the form of the mind. we're going to hear all this. The mind is also inert, believe it or not. Every attribute we assign to ourselves actually belongs to the kshetra, the field. It doesn't belong to the knower of the field, because you can perceive it. So that means it's not the perceiver. So whether it's a physical illness, feelings of loneliness, a quick intellect or a slow intellect, they all belong to anatma, not the atma. So mentally, we just give them back. So it's not me. So this is a process, very gradual process of de-identifying with the kshetra, with the field, with the inert world. And everything we can see and know, we have to de-identify with that, so we don't mix it up with our perception of ourselves. This process is also, in a reverse way, very helpful in discarding our ego. And it helps us become more rooted in humility. Any good qualities we perceive that we have, we can just say, well, that's part of this aspect. It's not the consciousness. So de-identifying is the first step, but that's not enough, obviously. We have to identify with the knower, with the kshetrajna. So he's going to guide us through that part of the process as well. We have to cultivate the feeling of oneness with the Paramatma, the feeling that we are one and the same, identical with the Supreme. But that is not possible until we start discarding all the wrong notions. You can't take a positive, correct notion and put it on top of a wrong notion. You have to get rid of the wrong notions first. And, with each wrong notion, we add a correct, truthful, more spiritual definition of ourselves. So these two steps represent all of spirituality and all of life in reality. So detach or relinquish the anatma and attach or embrace the atma. In the next 3 verses, Krishna will continue to discuss the kshetra, the field, this inert world, as a preparation for further discussion, which is going to be about the anatma and atma. So we have 3 verses about the kshetra to help us understand just what all is not the real me. And then the last verse will be about some other things. So let's read that 5th verse together, and then we'll go into the actual explanation. Repeat after me. Rishibhir Bahudha Gitam Chandobhir Vividai Pratak Brahma Sutra Padaishchaiva Hetumadbhir Vinishchitaihi. I'm going to leave that slide there on the screen and read out a slightly modified version of the text that you are reading on the screen, which is part of the ashram's taken from the ashram's version of the Bhagavad Gita. So that first part, the truth about kshetra and kshetrajna, is actually, should be in parentheses because it doesn't actually come in the text. And actually, grammatically, Sanskrit doesn't need to have a subject. But we could say, minimally, we could say it has been sung, or this has been sung by rishis in many ways in various distinctive chants with Vedic in parentheses, because it doesn't show up, but that's what it means, in the reasoning and convincing passages of the Brahma Sutras. So, this verse doesn't need a whole lot of explanation. It's basically a glorification of the knowledge that Krishna is teaching us through Arjuna. And it's not a new knowledge he's saying. He does this throughout the Gita. He gives credit to all the people who came before. And he is 5,000, at minimum, he's 5,200 years back. So when he talks about the ancient times, we can only guess, how many years back that is. So he's saying this is from the rishis. It's part of timeless heritage of the vast Vedic literature. So I'm just sharing with you that whole tradition. And he's also saying that many, indirectly pointing out that there are other acharyas who have been writing about it. And Brahma Sutras is supposed to be from Veda Vyasa. It's considered to be the steps to attaining Brahman. That's why he uses that word padaihi. They are the steps to realizing or knowing Brahman. And that phrase, reasoning and convincing, is there probably to show that it's not blind faith or some kind of superstitious belief. So it's important for us to recognize especially when we read a verse like this, that Krishna's not teaching a new philosophy. There's no Krishna school of philosophy or Gita school of philosophy. We can talk about the language that the Gita uses or Krishna uses, but the philosophy, the philosophical outlook is simply Vedanta, Advaita. It's not a specific something. It's not an ism. And that's, evident here. He's saying that whatever he's teaching is a continuation of the pre-existing spiritual legacy, which shows that it is holding its, position throughout long thousands, perhaps 10,000s, hundreds of thousands of years. We don't know. And another important thing to remember is that, like I mentioned in a recent satsang, Krishna is both an acharya or a great teacher who spreads the teaching, and he is also an avatar, just like Amma. She's an acharya and an avatar. She's repackaging the ancient teachings for the modern day, and she's also born divine. So Krishna taught in his way, in his time, but because of the culture at that time, there was no way for him to reach everybody all over the world. Amma is able to do that now. It's one of the only few benefits of Kali Yuga. She can get that message out to everybody, from the most intelligent and the most affluent to the people who have simple minds and have no resources, financial or otherwise. So having introduced the topic and glorified it, the next two verses are going to be Krishna's explanation and definition of kshetra, the field. He already gave a brief definition before, but let's hear a couplet of verses that give us a lot of examples that'll take us a little while to cover. Maha Bhutanyahankaro Buddhir Avyaktamevacha Indriyani Tashaikancha Panchachendriya Gocharaha Ichchadvesha Sukham Dukkham Sangadachetana Tritihi Etat Kshetram Samasena Savikaram Udahritam. Now I'll read a slightly modified version of that for you. The great elements, and before great we can put in parenthesis the 5 great elements: egoism, intellect, as also the unmanifested, and then in parentheses, Mula Prakriti, the 10 senses and the One, and then in parentheses, mind. and the 5 objects of the senses: desire, aversion, pleasure, pain, the physical body, and then here we can add something which is in parentheses, aggregate. Actually, the word used in this verse is aggregate, but that's just a little too, far away from the meaning physical body for us. But that is the original word. And we have a misspelled sentience here, but I'm going to just strike that completely and instead say intelligence/intellect. And along with the word fortitude, we could also consider other words like firmness. This is the kshetra with its evolutes. That word evolute feels a little archaic. I think we could make it modifications better. That would be a little more palatable for modern English. So the 5 great elements, egoism, intellect, as also the unmanifested mula prakriti, the 10 senses and the 1 mind, and the 5 objects of the senses: desire, aversion, pleasure, pain, and the physical body, intelligence, firmness. This is the kshetra with its modifications, briefly stated. I don't know how brief that is, but that's what those 2 verses mean. So they give a crisp definition of this field that we've been talking about. And when we hear a little more explanation, we'll understand that it's really the entire inert universe. And when we say inert universe, there's 2 versions to it. There's 2 flavors, if you want to put it that way. Because we have the present state that we're in, which is we call srishti, or creation. Creation has not just taken place, but is constantly taking place. And we don't know how much longer, there's we can guess, but very, very long time. And after some time, what this we call the day of Brahman, Brahmaji, the creator. One day is one creation, and then the night of Brahmaji, the creator, is called pralaya, when the whole universe dissolves and there's like a void, you could say. Physically, there's a void. But that void is called pralaya because there is existence still. So during that pralaya column, that pralaya time, when there's no physical manifestation, it's just purely, it's just a void, you could call it, I suppose. Void also kind of implies space, so, it's a tricky word. That's why pralaya is a very unique word. It means the next creation is kind of waiting to happen, but there's no physical manifestation. It's the unmanifest. That's what is meant by the unmanifest. But it is still that same nature in seed form. So you have an inert universe. In other words, inert without consciousness. Inert universe. It's not going to have a sentient seed, right? The seed is also inert. And that seed, when it sprouts and becomes the creation, after who knows how many billions of trillions of years, it's still inert. So both are simply inert and considered to be part of the kshetra, or the inert universe. Now, we should clarify that in these verses, Krishna does employ some terminology from another school of philosophy, which is called Sankhya philosophy. In fact, this verse is considered to be like a rejoinder to that school of philosophy, as well as another one called Vaisheshika. So it's not the same, even though he's using these words, he's not Sankhya philosophy is not in consonance with Vedanta or Amma's teachings. So he's not a believer of that. He's just using the language because it came before him, before his time. It was said to have been started by, someone, Kapila Muni. He was the original proponent, and he was followed by Patanjali with his Yoga Sutras. That's why Yoga Sutras also are not in line with Vedanta. Just be careful when you read it. Don't think that you're reading a Vedantic text, because it's not actually. We're not going to go into that now. But so if modern scholars say that Kapila Muni lived 2,700 years ago, it doesn't really tally up, because we know from the traditional standpoint that Gita is at least 5,100 years old. So it's known that the Sankhya philosophy was before Krishna. And when he uses that word Sankhya in second chapter, he doesn't mean that school of philosophy. He means what he's talking about in chapter 2, which we covered a long time ago. So though the findings of Sankhya philosophy are not accepted by Vedanta, some parts are similar, like the creation process. So Krishna uses the jargon. Perhaps it was the going jargon at the time. So he uses that when appropriate. And Amma does that too. She uses scientific terminology. She even uses like materialistic terminology to explain things to people, right? So she'll talk about cars and phones and food and all these things, because this is, we're all drenched in that kind of culture. So it's easy to communicate things by using the going jargon of the time. So that creation concept is somewhat similar to Vedanta and the Sankhya philosophy. So his explanation here is based on the terms that the Sankhya philosophers use to explain creation. But in Krishna's version of it, in verse 5, the first half of those verses that we covered, we chanted, they're in reverse order of creation. So he goes from the five elements to the ego, to the intellect, and to the unmanifest. But the order of creation is considered to be, you have the unmanifest seed of creation, and then from there comes the intellect, and from there comes the ego, and then from there comes the bhutas, but the bhutas here are subtle elements. He's talking about the 5 great elements, but he doesn't mean the ones that that make up our body. Those are the panchabhutas. He's talking about the pancha tanmatras. I know too much jargon and terminology, but the point is, it's not a tangible form of those, earth, water, fire, etc. It's the intangible subtle form. Afterwards comes the concrete form. So these 4 steps in the creation process start off with the unmanifest, intellect, ego, and then those subtle 5 elements. And that unmanifested, we should remember, is what I explained a moment ago. It means that it's the inert universe in seed form. Because we have to be very careful, because the unmanifest is also sometimes taken to mean consciousness, Paramatman, Brahman, the Atman. And I have been using that word unmanifest, a few times, maybe even tonight. So don't get confused. That here it means that seed of the inert universe. So the seed is also inert. So he has these 4 he's given us, right? He has the unmanifested, intellect, ego, the 5 tanmatras, subtle 5 organs, subtle 5 elements. Then he talks about the 10 indriyas, or the 10 organs, 5 of knowledge and 5 of action. And he talks about the mind. So all put together, there's 19 elements. And then he adds on top of that the 5 gross elements, the ones we can actually see and contact with. And he does that by referring to them as the 5 objects of the senses. So this is 24. This brings us to 24. Why is he spending so much time just to get to the number 24, right? Because those 24 items are called the 24 Tatwas of Sankhya philosophy. So that's how we know it's coming from that in jargon terms. But even Sankhya philosophy says that all 24 of these are inert. What? My intellect is inert, my mind is inert. How can that be? My ego is inert? That's what we're going to find out. They come and go based on the cycle of creation and dissolution. Because at the time of dissolution, there's no me, there's no you, right? Because there's no bodies, there's nothing there. It's only in seed form. So these 24 elements, or we could say Tatwa is the best word for it. These 24 components, they comprise the entire kshetra, visible, invisible, everything. And that leaves nothing else except for the supreme unmanifest, which is Brahman, the consciousness principle. So without that, but the consciousness, without that statement, the whole universe would be lifeless. Despite all these things, subtle elements, mind, intellect, all that, it needs consciousness to have any importance, have any meaning. So Krishna's point to Arjuna is that none of these 24 things are conscious. And you are not. You're conscious, right? So you are not any of those 24 things. You are the knower of all of those. Now we have to really understand what that means, we have to look at each of those terms. We're not going to go through 24 terms. We're just going to go through the key ones. So Jnanadev, whom you know I love dearly, his commentary, I'm going to quote him quite a few times tonight. This is how he describes the mind. He says, that which increases desires, strengthens expectations, and reinforces fear. That from which duality springs up, and which fattens ignorance, and pushes the senses into the objects of senses. That which is the very storehouse of delusion, and imprisons the reasoning faculty. I don't know, does that sound like a friend or a foe to you? An ally or a foe? Yes, definitely. It's not a friend at all. And then we have a description of the body as well. He calls it the aggregate because it's an aggregate of all 5 of the gross elements. We have earth. We're mostly earth, this body. Actually, the other day we pointed out we're mostly here. Was it hydrogen, oxygen or something like that? All those elements make up the body. But to the eye, it looks like we're, made out of the dirt element, the earth element. So all those 5 elements are in this body, so it's an aggregate of those. And since the subtle elements, even those subtle 5 tanmatras that create the concrete 5 elements, those are also inert. So, of course, the visible and tangible 5 elements are definitely going to be inert. So, an interesting commentary on the body has been provided by Sri Ramakrishna Deva. Many of you may know him. He has a beautiful quote which I'd like to share with you. Why do devotees look after this body so carefully when it is actually a combination of perishable things? Nobody pays any heed to an empty package, right? But people carefully preserve a paper box containing precious gems and jewels. That shows that the devotees take care of the body because it is the temple of God. They cannot afford to neglect it. All human bodies are treasure chests containing God. So the importance to this body comes only from the fact that it's our vehicle to realizing God. That's the only reason why we should take care of it, but not pamper it, right? Yes, take care of your health, but don't pamper the body because that's the beginning of the end. And when Krishna uses that word intelligence, or which was put as sentience, or intellect, or something like that, that's coming from the Sanskrit word chetana. And in this verse, it can be interpreted in 2 different ways. One is that it means the intellect simply. But the other is more widely accepted, which is that it refers to the reflection of the consciousness in the subtle body. And that is called Chittabhasa. The reflection of consciousness, Chaitanya, in the subtle body, Sukshma Sharira of the human being, is called Chittabhasa. Abhasa just means reflection and Chit means consciousness. So when I was talking, if you were listening to the satsang from last week where we were talking about death and how it's when the subtle body departs from the physical body, and it's like a reflective film peeling off the back of a piece of glass. So the mirror doesn't work anymore, right? When that happens. So that's reflection cannot be perceived when the subtle body leaves the physical body. So that is what we mean by Chittabhasa, when it's kind of like when you look at yourself in a mirror, you see your reflection only because that film is there. So that reflection is not the real you, right? It only has any meaning because there is the real you shining or reflected in it. So Shankaracharya gives an example for that Chittabhasa. He says, like the fire element manifests in heated metal, the body is pervaded by the Atman, the self's essence, in the form of a reflection of consciousness. So whether you take it as the intellect or this reflection of consciousness, it is not consciousness itself, right? If it is, then that would be a contradiction to all of Krishna's other teachings, because 1 minute it's there in the body, and then 1 minute it's not there after somebody dies. So where did it go, right? It cannot be the actual consciousness. It can only be a reflection. So from this, we can understand that the Chittabhasa is really the only thing giving sentience to this body and everything in the world. That too, it is only the subtle body that can reflect that consciousness. So when that subtle body leaves, like I said, the inherently inert physical body shows its true nature when the subtle body leaves. Because the subtle body was the reflective medium. When it's gone, the body reverts to the 5 elements. Just starts to disintegrate. So all living beings have a subtle body of some sort. And their level of sentience will be in accordance with the capacity of that subtle body. That's why Amma says, plants have consciousness. Everything has consciousness. Even little worms, right? All these microorganisms, perhaps she would say the same thing. We just assume because we don't feel that. She feels it. So death can also be compared with the filament of the light bulb breaking. Until the light bulb gets broken, we could see the expression of the electricity in the form of the bulb's light. But when that filament breaks, that's like the subtle body. So it seems like the electricity is gone. Just like somebody leaves the body, we think that they're gone forever. It's just that we cannot perceive them anymore. Just like we can't see the electricity manifested without the light bulb working. And when the mirror moves, let's say you have a handheld mirror, it looks like let's say you have the sun shining in the mirror, and you're looking at that, it looks like the sun is moving also, because your hand is moving the mirror around, and so also, the electricity is the same thing. It looks like the electricity has gone. So the consciousness principle needs a reflective medium to be perceived, but it is not affected by whatever happens to that reflective medium. That's the key thing. The reflection is helpless because it's relying on that medium. But real consciousness doesn't rely on anything. It is the one substratum of the whole universe. And in verse 7, Krishna, which is the second half of that couplet of verses that we just read, Krishna lists a few mental modifications like desire, aversion, and so on. And the purpose is just to show that everything in this subtle body, we call it the Manomaya Kosha particularly, is nothing but the kshetra, is nothing but this field. Desire, aversion, pleasure, and pain, these are all in the level of the mind. So when we talk about those, if the mind is inert, then all of these modifications of the mind should also be inert. And we can give some explanations of these points briefly, definitions of them from a spiritual standpoint. Desire is seeking repeated contact with objects that seem agreeable to the senses. So the senses have their tastes, and they think that, oh, this is good, that's not good. Because the other one, aversion, is avoiding contact with the objects that seem disagreeable to the senses. So our desires and, aversions are products of the makeup of our sense organs. They're dictating all the things we do in life. We drive somewhere to get something. We drive somewhere to avoid somebody or something. All of that is because we are at the whims. We are helpless. We're at the mercy of these sense organs and their likes and dislikes. About pleasure, one commentator explains it nicely by saying, it is an experience that pacifies the mind and promotes sattva guna. It promotes a very pure and peaceful state of mind. Wow, that's what I want, always, right? It's a really nice positive explanation that suggests that what we should really be searching for is sattva guna. That's our real goal, not pleasure. The pleasure is just it's the go-between, between me and that sattva guna that I want to experience. And that go-between, that broker, he takes a hefty commission in the form of wasting our time, energy, and spiritual strength. We may feel that pleasure is just, who cares? It's nothing. But every time we rely on pleasure to get that momentary feeling of peace, we're using up all of our energy. We're becoming weaker each time. So Jnanadev has a really profound description of what pleasure is. He calls it that which makes one forget everything else when it is attained. It even makes all functions of the senses to lie dormant in the solitude of the heart. In short, and this is the part that I wasn't expecting, the feeling that arises when the individual soul is in intimate association with the Atman, that is happiness. And the feeling created by failing to secure this happiness is pain. When we're happy, it means we're in more close, more intimate connection with our true self. And when we fail to be in contact with our true self, that's what we call pain. Coming from a really profound, a very genuine, realized being hundreds of years ago. Some people say he's also a partial avatar. Whatever it is, we can trust these words. So we're hearing a lot about, all the things that are not reality. They're not Atma. This is the Anatma. It's the changing. It's the Kshetra. It's the inert world and universe. So what about this Kshetrajna, the one who knows it, the Atman? Who is he or she, and where are they? Well, you can search all over this world and you'll never find it. You can search throughout your life and you'll never find it. Why not? Because whatever research you do, that field of research will be the Kshetram, the Anatma. You cannot find the Atma in the Anatma. It's just impossible. We cannot find it because the Kshetrajna, the knower, happens to be your own self. That's why scientists say they cannot locate consciousness. Now they say that consciousness has no location. It has no location because the one who wants to locate it is consciousness. So a good example for this that's used in Vedantic explanations is the Guru tells the disciple, to go to the Vedanta Vidyalayam, where they're studying their Vedanta scriptures. Go over there and tell me how many people are there in the room. So the disciple comes back and said, there's 9 people. And then he says, really? Go back and count. He goes back and says, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9. Goes back. I just counted again, twice actually. Only 9 people there. And then the Guru says, really? Try one more time. He keeps doing it over and over again. And then the disciple is exhausted. He comes back and he says, what am I missing? And the Guru said, did you count yourself? And he says, oh, no, I actually didn't. There's 10 people. So the 10th man is the Atman. The 10th man is you. It is me. It's our true being. And those 9, disciples he was counting in the scriptural hall, they're all the things we perceive in this world. We can see all of them, but we forget our true self, who is the seer. So with this verse, or this combination of verses, the topic or description of kshetra, the field, the inert universe, is completed for now. He described it briefly in verse 2, and a little bit more here in verses 6 and 7. And he touched on the knower of the field, the kshatrajna, in verse 2, saying, it is the one who knows the field, the kshetra. And then in verse 3, he said that he, pure consciousness, is the one and only knower in all beings. So that knower, that consciousness principle, is only one, and it exists for everybody equally, and it is the essence of all beings. He said that, in a nutshell in verse 3. So up to here, he has only answered really 2 of the questions that Arjuna had. Arjuna wanted to understand kshetra and kshetrajna. He covered those. But there were 4 more terms he wanted to hear about. Prakriti and Purusha. We'll get to that. Knowledge and what ought to be known. So in verses 8 through 12, Krishna is going to talk about that knowledge. So out of the remaining 4, he's just going to talk about one of those for the next 5 verses. And remember, in this chapter 13, knowledge, or what he's calling jnanam, does not mean what it means most everywhere else in the Gita. Here it means values that are conducive to attaining the goal of Atmajnana, or self-knowledge. So remember, it's not the knowledge of the Upanishads per se. It's values that are very essential, crucial for our spiritual growth and attaining self-knowledge, but not the knowledge itself. So let us read out that final verse for tonight. Amanitvam adambhitvam ahimsa kshantirarjavam acharyopasanam shaucham stairyam atma vinigraha. You can look at the translation there, and I'll add a few edits. Absence of pride, and we could put it in parentheses as humility. Freedom from hypocrisy, or we could call it unpretentiousness. Non-violence. Forbearance can also be taken as forgiveness. Uprightness, or we could say rectitude. Steadfastness. And I also like constancy. And the last word, self-control. If people have a little problem with the word control, we can say self-restraint. A lot of these English words are kind of loaded words, and here in the West also, we like to avoid words that might prick people's emotions. So this is the first of 5 verses that are going to enumerate 20 virtues and values that will accelerate our spiritual growth. Are anybody out there interested in accelerating their spiritual growth? Nah. I think everybody wants to. We all feel like we're going very slowly. And if you think you're going really fast, that's also kind of scary because that usually doesn't happen really quickly like that. This verse alone has 9 of those values and virtues. So we have 11 more to go, but this one is really packed, very dense. So consider these virtues to be like the do's and don'ts that the doctor prescribes along with the medicines. You go in there and he'll say, or she'll say, take this is how you take it and how often, blah, blah, blah. And then they'll say also, don't drink anything cold, or you should not exert yourself for the next so many days. Or they might say the opposite. You better go out and get exercise. You got to walk this far every day, etc. So both the medicine and the routine that the doctor gives are equally important because they mutually support each other. If you do only one, maybe the effect of the other one will be lost. So it's not optional, it's mandatory. Same thing here. Because actually we all suffer from the same disease. We call it samsara roga or bhava roga. It just means the disease of birth and death. The disease of repeated death, or the disease of being caught in the ocean of samsara. And there's only one medicine for that disease, and that is knowing yourself, self-knowledge, atma-jnana. Now we might say, I just want to focus on Amma. Yes, that's good. But Amma's saying all these things also. She's telling us all these things. And we call that Gurupadesha, the teaching of the Guru. So we have to follow Amma's teachings. In some ways, her teachings are even more difficult than what Krishna is talking about. Especially because she's there and she'll look at you and say, you're not doing it. Or you should do this. Krishna is gone, at least in physical form so long ago. He can't hold us accountable, but Amma can and always does. So along with Amma's teachings, we have to follow all the do's and don'ts. Why? Why not? Why does it matter? Because when we feel we aren't getting enough benefit from Amma's teachings, or we're not able to retain them or practice them, the reason is only this: a shortcoming in the cultivation of these inner qualities. And believe me, I go through the same thing. I am not an exception at all. I have a lot of those issues myself. I admit it. But at least I understand, from, all these teachings that, Amma's telling us to study, that it's my fault. It's not for any lack of her teachings or the teachings of the scriptures. Because for intellectual people, I'm not saying me, I'm saying an intellectual person, understanding the teachings might be really easy. But following the do's and don'ts of spirituality are harder for everybody, whoever you are. If they have a really innocent heart, then it may be easier. Very pure heart from the begin with, it may be easier, but most likely that means they did a lot of sadhana in a previous life. So if we think that there's something wrong with the teaching, we may do all kinds of irrelevant things. You're going to, learn so many different types of meditation, learn and do so many different types of puja, or have other people do 100 pujas for us, or going to so many seminars and every temple all over the world, We'll do all these things, and the one thing we won't do is change what's inside of us. That is the most difficult thing, and that is mandatory, just as mandatory as the teachings are. So why are they so important? Because these virtues and values are indispensable in overcoming all the problems that crop up on our spiritual path. We have to face anger. We have to face whatever hatred or dislike or jealousy or impatience. All these things come up. Even when people go to Amritapuri, It's supposed to be heaven on earth. Sometimes they experience all these. There's a lot of, just normal people there. They're not yogis or avatars or mahatmas. They have these problems also. So to survive in Amrita Puri itself, you need these qualities. Maybe more than anywhere else in the world, because Amma's testing all of us. And until those problems, the inner problems, are addressed, we're going to find it very difficult, extremely difficult to make any spiritual progress. So much so that some ashrams teach this chapter first, just to drill it into the students' heads at the beginning. That's how important this virtues section is considered to be. And Jnanadev says, one possessed of knowledge can be identified by the following indicators. Okay, what are those indicators? Amanitvam means the absence of pride, humility. It means you don't praise yourself, you don't have any superiority complex, you don't feel great, you don't have this feeling like the feeling I had when I first came to meet Amma. When I walked in the hall, I looked at all these people wearing white, and I just happened to have just graduated from college, so I thought I was God's gift to the world. And I looked at these people and I was like, who are these people? I'm greater than them. So I should have been kicked out right then and there that day, but Amma, we'll see. The next quality actually explains, one of the next qualities explains why she didn't. So how do we get that humility? Well, to do it sort of methodically, whenever we have feelings of superiority, we can look at someone who is superior to us and think, actually, I'm inferior to other people. And actually, the person who I thought was inferior, they have qualities that I don't have. So actually, they're superior to me in other ways. So that's an easier way to do it, because it's not too far from our normal thought processes, except you have to have presence of mind. You have to catch your mind when it feels like that. But from the Vedantic angle, if we want to look at it from a deeper standpoint, we can say superiority and inferiority, all these differences come from the anatma. They don't come from the atma. They're not permanent. When I was 1 year old, or when I was newborn and that person was newborn, we were both nothing. We were just babies. There was no difference. Over time we changed, but it's all temporary. And when we're 100 years old, we'll be the same, very old and incapacitated. So the more I claim these anatma or unreal differences, the stronger my identification becomes with the body, the mind, and all these things I'm trying to let go of. I'm trying not to identify with them, but I'm strengthening those identifications every time I judge somebody. And that is definitely going to be an obstacle to me attaining self-knowledge. And Jnanadev has wonderful descriptions of all of, what a person would look like when they have those qualities. And just take a wild guess who it sounds like. He says of the humble person, although his knowledge is encyclopedic, like the guru of the gods, Brihaspati, he conceals his true personality under the guise of simplicity for fear of becoming a celebrity. I mean, this is Amma will say, I grew up in a village. I only speak Malayalam, One time when she was coming home coming back to the house from giving darshan in San Ramon, I was sitting in the room next to Amma's room. We were waiting for her to come, and I just happened to have one scriptural book in my hand. And she walked in the room. She happened to see me, and the Swamis were there. And then she asked me, what does it say? I want to learn about the scriptures. You guys should teach me. It's like, this is crazy. This is exactly because she meets this quality. She's just showing what is real humility. She is the essence of all the scriptures, and she'll say, I never read the scriptures, in a humble way. So that's proof that she's the real deal. The next word, next quality or virtue is freedom from hypocrisy. I think like unpretentiousness is a better word, or non-ostentation. Not really such neat and tidy words, but that's what this word adambitvam means. So it means they have no pretentiousness, no deceit. They don't exhibit any pomp or show about themselves, even spiritual, pomp. It's very common, right? I have done this. I built a school. I do so much charity. I've studied the Gita, all the Upanishads, and I chant the Lalita Sahasranamam every day at 3 a.m. Do you chant the Lalita Sahasranamam like that? It's so arrogant. So what Jnanadev says is, freedom from ostentation can be likened to the mind of a miser who won't show his treasures to anyone, even if threatened with death. In that way, even at the risk of his own life, he would not make his own good actions known. Oh, wow. Just imagine, it's like having your good deeds being known by others is like, makes you want to die. We're like, God, isn't anybody taking notice of all the good things I'm doing? Right? Not just the opposite, but like the extreme opposite of us. So these first two terms seem kind of similar in a way, but the first, absence of pride, is inner, and the absence of ostentation is obviously an external thing. So the first one is subtle, the second one is visible. That's the main difference. Ahimsa, non-violence, non-injury. It's a common word used today, but I think Krishna's version of it, Amma's version of it, is definitely much deeper. I wanted to say to you that the first two verses that we covered in this chapter, they took up only, I think, a page and a half. He didn't have a whole lot to say about those. I'm talking about the Jnanadev's commentary, Jnaneshwari. So he didn't have much to say about the first couple of verses, I think it was. On like a page and a half. When we get to non-violence, that one word, non-violence, ahimsa, he has 6.5 pages of things to talk about. He just gives so much importance to it. So we know that one of his focuses is cultivating these virtues and explaining how important they are to us. And this is what he has to say, amongst many other things, of one who practices ahimsa. Were he to open his eyes, feeling pleased in his heart, his glance would be like a shower of sweet ambrosia descending down from the rays of the moon. Whatever being he may look at through his pleasing glance, that being would feel fully satisfied. Anybody ever had someone glance at them like that? Oh, that glance? Oh, yeah, that one. Right? It's a perfect example. Amma is not just ahimsa because she doesn't hurt anybody, but she has that such a presence of non-violence or non-injury that it radiates through her eyes even. Another commentator has said that ahimsa or non-violence is possibly only for one who beholds all beings as manifestations of the one cosmic being. Again, Amma qualifies. She's the only one that qualifies. For us, though, we need to kind of break it down a little bit more because it's too difficult to see everybody as God. I know that. So what we can think of is that the instruments of doing injury to others are 3. Our thoughts, words, and deeds, right? And the objects of injury are another person's, or even perhaps our own body, or someone else's body, mind, and intellect. We can do injury to their body, we can do injury to their mind, and also to their intellect. So this makes for 9 different types of injury that we can do to people or we should avoid. We can also harm others due to our carelessness. So we have to be very careful on how we speak and our reactions to each situation. I'll share a little story, which is a little embarrassing. Happened not long after I came to Chicago, and I was with, a bunch of different devotees, and, I hadn't seen everybody too many times, but there was one woman who came from out of town, and I had seen her once before, and she came with her husband, and they came just to be in the ashram. And when I saw her tummy was so big. I thought, oh, wow, because it'd been a few months since I'd seen her. And I thought, oh, she's pregnant. And I looked at her stomach and I went, oh. And then I looked at her face and she was so shocked. Why are you looking at my stomach and going, oh? And then I thought to myself, oh my God, what if she's not pregnant? So then I realized that I made a terrible mistake. And anyhow, it was my carelessness, right? And so that had the potential, may have even hurt that person's feelings. So it's in many ways, even unconsciously, we can do it. We can do it. So we have to have more awareness, self-awareness. So much more can be said about nonviolence, but we'll have to put that for another talk. Forbearance, forgiveness. Yeah, this is like patience. And Shankaracharya says it is a mind that doesn't get agitated even when subjected to wrongdoing. So that means even if you feel justified, you should not get agitated. I mean, agitation doesn't do anybody any good, of course. But we still like to justify and rationalize our reactions. But he's saying, no, if you want to cultivate the right qualities, you should not get agitated when people criticize you or even do it wrongly. So this is the strength that we need to follow that path of ahimsa. So Amma's non-injury, Amma's non-violence is supported by this forbearance. And that's why she didn't throw me out of the hall that first day, even though I was wearing my shoes when I walked in to the temple. So she didn't, because she has perfect forbearance, forgiveness, patience. And that is what is needed to strengthen our ahimsa. It gives us strength. And it also makes our love real. So we acquire that from our forbearance and patience. And this also requires us to see, all beings as manifestations of God. Uprightness comes from the Sanskrit word arjavam. I think rectitude is also a little more familiar to us. Uprightness seems to have some kind of different ring to it. It's also like straightforwardness, absence of crookedness. You don't try to wiggle your way around people and deceive them. That requires that our thoughts, words, and deeds are all in harmony. So somebody who has their mental, verbal, and physical personalities all harmonized is what he's referring to here. There's no split personality. It's a well-integrated human being. And Jnanadev says here, his behavior with all is uniform, just like Amma. Her behavior with everybody is uniform. We can change it to the masculine case, and it'll describe Amma very well. She harbors no bias in her mind against anyone, and she is free from suspicion and greed, just as a child feels no hesitation in approaching its mother. So she feels no hesitance in placing her opinions before the world. She has done that many times, very confidently, because she has no malice, and she's equal to everybody. This next quality is one that I really love. I think you all will enjoy it as well. Service to the teacher. It's something that all of us hold dear to our hearts. And but I think it needs a little explanation, and I just love Jnanadev's explanation here. It just really touches me. But keep in mind, service to the teacher means the guru, right? Because Acharya really could connote any kind of teacher. But in this context, it means a acharya who is not just teaching spirituality, but living it to a T. That means Amma for us. She practices the teachings in her life, and she inspires us to do so. So if she says, love everybody, we have to try, at least, right? So Shankaracharya translates this word upasanam here as seva to the Guru, and through that seva we're worshipping the Guru. So this passage from Jnanadev's text is one of my favorites. I'll read that out. It's a little long, so I'll just read it through. I know we're getting close to the end of the time. I'll try to finish on time. This passage explains the true disciple's attitude. So if we want to be a true disciple, he says that these are the kinds of thoughts that a true disciple will have. It doesn't mean the only thoughts, but it's so adorable the way he puts it. So this is the disciple's thinking. He thinks, I shall be the earth receiving the rain showers of the Guru's kindness. I shall be the Guru's house and his servant there, rendering him service. I shall be the threshold that the Guru crosses when entering and leaving the house. And I shall also be the doorkeeper. I shall be his wooden sandals, and I shall make him wear them. I shall be his umbrella, and shall simultaneously hold it as the umbrella bearer. I shall be the one notifying him of any unevenness in the path, the hands supporting him, and shall also be his torchbearer, walking ahead of him. I shall be his pitcher with which he rinses his mouth, and I shall make all preparations for his bath. I shall be the Guru's seat, his asana, as also his ornaments and his clothes, and the sandal paste for him to apply. I shall be his cook and serve him a meal, keeping him company while he is eating. In this way, I shall reach perfection in the Guru's service. I shall myself be that subject the Guru might feel interested in, and I shall assume all those forms that the Guru's eyes look upon with an affectionate glance. In this way, the disciple goes on serving while his body remains in existence, and afterwards, other novel ways suggest themselves to his intellect. I shall make the dust of this body mingle with the earth of the spot on which the Guru's feet stand. I shall make the portion of water in this body mingle with the water the Guru might touch. I shall add the portion of the fire element in my body to that of the oil lamp the preceptor, the Guru uses for light in his house. I shall place my vital airs in the hand fan so that I shall secure both the service of fanning the Guru and also the touch of the Guru's body. So beautiful. There's so many benefits to serving the Guru. Purification of mind is the first, for sure. And the second is that it helps us develop faith in the Guru's words and teachings. When we have a Sadguru, every sentence of Vedanta becomes meaningful. Only then does it become meaningful. Amma shows us the true beauty of Vedanta, the true beauty of the Gita in all its splendor. Through her, all of these teachings become meaningful in our life, only through her, because the Guru is the only one who can bring the scriptures to life. This is probably the most important benefit of serving the Guru. One more benefit is based on psychology. Whenever we respect a person, we try to imitate them, don't we? We imitate their clothes, their hairstyle, their mannerisms. You know, once during the bhajans, I saw some guy singing and going like this, like Amma does, you know. And then afterwards, one of the Swamis asked him, what does that mean? He says, I don't know, right? So he doesn't know why he's doing it just to imitate Amma. So let's say a tennis player wears a headband because he has long hair. We may be almost bald, but still want to wear the headband just to look like our tennis guru. So imitation is good only if the role model is good all around. But this is only possible with a live guru, a living guru. We have to have some kind of contact with the guru in order to imbibe their example. So we can have a photo of Shankaracharya, or, for that matter, Jnanadev in front of us, and we'll get some purification and concentration. But they're not a role model for us. We need a living Sadguru to have a role model. The last couple of qualities, purity, and also steadfastness, self-control, a few more left. We'll go through those very quickly. Shaucham means purity, both internal and external. So our surroundings, our room, our dress, our body, and what's inside. This is what Jnanadev has to say about it. He says, with the exterior cleansed and being enlightened internally by the lamp of knowledge, he is thoroughly purified. Otherwise, it would be only a mockery to perform acts of piety so long as the interior heart remains impure. It would be like adorning a corpse, or like bathing a donkey in the holy waters, or like plastering the exterior of a bitter gourd with jaggery. I love his examples. Who's going to take a donkey into the Ganges? Maybe someone a little crazy about their donkey, maybe. So the problem is that external purity is much easier than internal purity. We all struggle with that. So because people can't see what's in our mind, but we think, I better wear nice clothes because people will say I'm dirty if I wear dirty clothes. So how do we purify the mind? Well, serving Amma. It was the number one thing, I would say. Serving Amma, serving the needy people, selfless service. Shankaracharya does give another technique here that we can do all the time. You don't have to go anywhere to do it. It's basically what we've talked before as Pratipaksha Bhavana. So when a negative thought pops in your mind, you have to catch it, realize that, and then replace it with a corresponding positive thought. So if you feel proud, you substitute that with a humble thought. Like, God, there's just so many other things that I don't know how to do. Maybe I'm good at A, but like the rest of the alphabet I'm not good at, I have so many weak spots and just a few things that I can do with some success. So when we feel disdain for somebody, we can you say, wait a second, no, let me try to find some good qualities in that person too. And then I can learn things from them too, not just resent them. So this is one method. Another method is that every morning or whenever you do your prayers, you sit in front of Amma or whatever your altar is and take any negative qualities that you're aware of and just offer them at her feet. And then mentally imagine that you're picking up all Amma's positive qualities and bringing them into yourself. So you offer the dirt to Amma and receive the purity in return. It's a pretty good deal, right? That's what she came here for. And satsang, of course, everywhere, no matter where you are, just please connect with some kind of satsang. Not just this Gita class. We have so many other Amma programs going on around the world. You can tie into those pretty much 24/7. So even passively, we'll benefit from the company of fellow seekers. Steadfastness, constancy, steadiness, however you want to define it. Jnanadev says, just as the earth does not swerve from its position in any way by the impact of whirlwinds, the powerful upheavals of exciting passions and events which torment worldly people make no impression whatsoever on him. So you take like a big diamond and offer it to Amma. She's not going to say, oh, wow, I've been waiting for this, and talk about that all day long. She'll just say, oh, okay, now I can do all these things for other people. I can help a lot more people, So the only thing that stimulates her mind would just be thoughts of selfless thoughts and doing things for the needy people, her children. this steadfastness, this quality is important because I think we've all experienced sort of sadhana burnout at one time or another, or, we slow down, we don't have the motivation to do things. We're trying to make over our entire personality, and at one point we run up against a brick wall. So in order to not give up, we have to have some steadfastness. And for many people, that will just be their love for Amma. As long as you have that steadfast love for Amma, you won't fall off the path completely. Maybe a little bit in some ways, but you're never lost for good. So just keep that love to Amma, if nothing else, that. The last one, self-control, self-restraint. This means body and mind. We call it shama and dhamma in the usual Vedantic language. Shama dhamma daini manalaya karini. Right? So she's the one that gives us shama and dhamma, control of the mind and the body. And Jnanadev says he remains ever alert with two guards in the form of self-restraint and self-governance in his body. And that means yama niyama. At the main gate, which is the mind, and also at the withdrawal of sense organs from their respective objects. So he is alert, he has guards. The one guard is yama niyama, the other guard is pratyahara. Yama niyama means things that, the do's and don'ts of spirituality. And pratyahara means bringing the sense organs away from the objects. Don't let them fall prey to those. So he has guards there inside, or she has guards inside. So we need to, we have the guards, but they're ignored. They're not given any food or any attention. So they're just, barely alive. So we have to help them become stronger so that they will protect us. If we want protection, you have to, support the one who protects you. So even to pay attention to Amma's satsang, we need the cooperation of the mind, the body, and the senses. Otherwise, Amma may talk for an hour and we won't remember anything afterwards because our mind and our sense organs were wandering all over the place. And I think everybody knows what I'm talking about because it's a pretty prevalent tendency. Everybody struggles. But we don't want to. We want to remember. We want to remember at the crucial moment when we have to put it into practice. So some degree of control over the mind and body is absolutely necessary to even imbibe something from her. Reading her book, you need that as well. So Shankaracharya says here, self-control is the discipline imposed on the body and senses when they function against our real interest and the confinement of their activities to the path of truth. So don't we want to walk the path of truth? And do we have any other qualities that will help us walk on the path of truth? Yes. We have 11 more, and those will have to be talked about in the coming classes. There were a couple of questions, but since we're over time, I'm sorry, there were only 2. If you'll bear with me, I'll cover those questions. Even though I wrote down some answers to them, I'll have to cover those in the next class. So we will close with Asatoma and Loka, Samasta Sukhino, and then we'll have just a brief silent meditation to reflect on these teachings because we're over the time, so we'll abbreviate things a little bit so that it doesn't take too long. Namah Shivaya. Om Asatoma Sadgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha samastaha sukhino bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Om Namah Shivaya. We are just going to take a moment. Those of you who wish to remain and meditate with us in silence, please do so. At the end, we'll chant one more closing prayer. Just to get ourselves in the mood for the silent meditation, let us check our posture, trying to keep the back and neck relatively straight. Close your eyes. Take a few long, deep breaths. Feeling the body and mind relaxing further and further with each and every deep inhalation and exhalation. When the mind becomes calm and relatively still, you may begin to reflect on the meaning of these verses from today's class and how you can practice them in your daily life. Namah Shivaya. Let us close with one last prayer. Purnamada. Take a deep breath. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnad Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Om Namah Shivaya. And I hope to see you all for bhajans on Saturday and the next Gita class as well.